introduction to church planting. We're ready to start talking about deputation. Last time we talked about our sponsoring church and how important it was to, first and foremost, have agreement, with the sponsoring church. Whatever God has led you to do, whatever vision and thoughts and ideas that you have, you need to have the ability to just share that openly and honestly and not feel like you've got to be careful about anything. And if that's a problem between yourself and the potential, sponsoring church, then it's probably not the right match. It's probably not the right marriage. And so you need to be looking for that. We did also talk about the fact that, to me, seeking a sponsoring church, or even like when a church seeks a pastor, those are not the kind of things that you advertise for. It's not like a classified ad, where, hey, whoever will come along and sponsor me. But you're trusting and depending that God's going to raise that church up, probably from connections you already have, pastors and people that you already know. But maybe not. It may be something you wouldn't have expected to happen, but still yet, you can look at it and see God did it. It wasn't just that I was grasping for straws and, whoever came along, it worked out. But, God raised up this sponsoring church and gave us that opportunity. And so you're looking for all those things in your sponsoring church. And once you have that secured and everybody's on the same page about where you're going to be going, what you're going to be doing, some of the details, then you're ready to start out on deputation. Now, the first thing about deputation is making contact with the churches. You can start out making contact. What I would normally do is just send out a letter to all the churches. Start out with that. It's just a simple step. A letter to all the churches. And all the churches is not a big number. It's probably somewhere around 1,300. That if you count them all up in the ABA book, that is all the ones here in the United States. And then there's some in other countries. But we have way more churches than are listed in that book. Because, for example, none of the churches in Kenya are listed, and there's way over 200 of them, probably closer to 300. And so, in fact, we don't even really know how many there are, because our missionaries have started churches, and those churches have started churches, and those churches have started churches, and we kind of get an idea, but we really don't know exactly. And it's that way in a lot of countries. So, it's hard to say how many exactly we do have. But here in the States, I would say certainly no more than 1,500, and I think the number's more like 1,300 that are listed in the book. So I would send a letter to all of them. But there might be some other churches too that are not listed in the book. For example, down in Somerset, Kentucky, the local association down there is called the Cumberland River Association. And in the Cumberland River Association, there are about 40 churches. And probably about 25 of them are in the national ABA book. Another example would be over in southern Ohio, around Ironton area, where there's an association of churches there, probably about 20 churches, and only about 2 or 3 of them are listed in the National ABA book. These are churches that believe exactly what we believe. They would be interested, in the work that you're doing. But if you didn't know about those little pockets, then, you'd probably miss them. But if you know about them, all you got to do is contact somebody in that area that you know and say, hey, could you send me one of your local association books? And then you get that, and you've got the addresses where you can send out to these churches. So as many as you can, just a basic introductory letter. And, what's it going to say? It's going to say, your name, your calling. This is what God's called me to do. Your sponsoring church. A basic outline. And that outline would include, what you're going to do, where, maybe a little bit of how. You probably don't need that much detail, but maybe if you have something unique that you think people will be interested in, you might want to put a little bit in there how you're going to do it. But basically the how is, evangelism, discipleship, church planting. I mean, it's, that's the basics of how. And when, what's your goal of when you're going to be on the field and those kind of things. And so, put that in a letter. I don't think you want it to be more than a page. People just don't want a lot of detail. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Here in the United States, people just aren't into that. They want you to be concise. They want to be able to look at this and get a general idea. And even in your letter, you could say, hey, if you would like for us to come and present the work, here's how you can contact me. Have your email address, have your phone number, have your mailing address, whatever. But be aware that almost no one is going to call you. I mean, they're not going to read that letter and say, oh yeah, man, that sounds exciting, let's have them come. That is just maybe a few people that you already know pretty well might do that, but just from this letter, you're not going to get any deputation appointments. Probably not any. If so, very few. So what you got to do is you got to make some calls. You're going to have to not depend on that letter. You're going to have to make some calls and get some things going that way. Now, maybe your pastor of your sponsoring church can make some of these initial phone calls. And the value of that might be just people he knows, and also if people know him. Several years ago, actually been a long time ago now, when Brother Taylor first went to Kenya, nobody knew him except for just maybe 4 or 5 churches in Indiana that knew him from youth rallies and stuff like that. I mean, he was, basically a total unknown. And so it wouldn't have been bad for him to make all the phone calls and introduce himself and, all that sort of thing. But for me to be able, as his pastor, to call people I knew, which was a much bigger list than the people he knew, and to talk to people that knew me, which was a much bigger list than his list would have been, it was, at least in our opinion, more productive to get our initial appointments, to be able to work off of that. Now, you get to a place where we've pretty well called the people I know, and so it wouldn't be any more beneficial for the pastor to make that call than it would be the missionary to make that call. Or, the pastor might say, well, this is your ministry that God's called you to. You make the phone calls, you contact those people, and that's fine too. It's not a bad thing. But it's just the fact that, it's not what you know, but who you know. Sometimes it does make a difference.
What about pastors in other states, like someone really good in Michigan? Could you have them do appointments where you're in Michigan?
That is another good point, that you could ask another pastor to do that for you in that location. Like you said, hey, I'm going to go up to Michigan and do some deputation work. I know, Pastor so-and-so up there real well, Brother Chris Bocklage, I know him real well. So I'm going to call him and see if he'll have me come to his church. And then I'm going to ask him if he'll make some calls and maybe set up appointments for me for 2 or 3 weeks up there. And that is another way. In fact, a lot of times when a missionary calls me and asks, can they come to our church, I'll ask them, well, how long do you plan on being in the area? And do you still have open appointments? would you like me to call and get some appointments for you, or do you feel like you got it, pretty much under control? Sometimes I'll offer that to a missionary in case it would be helpful. Sometimes they say, well, no, I've pretty got a good idea of who I'm going to call and everything, but sometimes they're like, oh man, yeah, that'd be a big help because I don't really know anybody, up there. And so that can be another effective thing, is to have another local pastor in the area that has more contacts than you do. And generally, if he's a mission-minded pastor, he's going to try to send you to the places he thinks would be most beneficial, for your ministry, which in a minute we'll talk a little bit more about that. But now, before you make too many phone calls and start setting these appointments, you kind of need to map things out. You don't want to be in a situation where you're zigzagging, all over the place, trying to, make these appointments. You want to be able to call the guy in Michigan and say, yeah, looks like from June the 2nd through June the 21st, we'll be up here in your area. That gives me 12 appointment opportunities. What would be most convenient for you if you'd be able to have us? And then if he's going to set up appointments for you, okay, here's the rest of the open dates, or you start making these phone calls around and filling it up. But so you say, okay, we're going to go up there to Michigan, and then from there I know that I've been invited to this missions conference over in this area, so we're going to be in that area. We'll plan on spending 2 or 3 weeks. Fall of the year, all the local associations are going on in Arkansas, so we're going to plan to be down there September, October, and November, and we're going to get that all worked out. And so you map it out when you plan to be in these areas, so that you're not running all over the place. Another thing that you might want to, a part of this, strategizing here, is you might want to think about where's home base going to be. And that could vary depending on your needs. One thing might be, you might decide, we're just going to be mobile. We're going to get us a travel trailer, and just home will be on the road where we're at. Or we're going to stay in homes and motels and, stay with in mission houses. Some more and more churches have that kind of set up now, where a place where a missionary can stay, and so we're going to do something like that. That's another possibility. So you kind of got those two choices. Some people like an RV or a travel trailer because they just like knowing that even though it's a travel trailer, each night they're going to their place. It's theirs, and they feel like they've got more privacy, so on and so forth. Others feel like, that doesn't matter. Just wherever we can stay, we'll stay. It has to do some with your family structure, and there's a lot that goes into making that decision. I would say this though, financially, it's no better to do like a travel trailer or an RV than it is just to go around and stay in hotels. It's a big investment, to put together. If it's a travel trailer, which a lot of people like that because you can unhook from it and not feel like you're lugging it all over the place, whereas if an RV, you're just in the RV, But you get a decent enough truck that's going to pull that thing for thousands of miles wherever you're going. And the travel trailer, even if it's a modest used travel trailer, you're talking about $15,000 wrapped up into being able to do this, or breaking down on the road once a month, working on it. That's, if you don't spend some money, then you're going to end up having some trouble to deal with because you didn't spend the money. Well, how many hotels could you stay in over the period of a year's time for $15,000? A lot. That's You know, even if you said $75 a night, which you can do better than that because if you're traveling a lot, you can get in these situations where you can get free nights and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So 75, that 2 nights is 150. And how many, I mean, you could stay in a motel about 5 years, you know, for $15,000. So it's not better financially. So the question is it better just for what your family needs? You know, that's the real question. Because, you know, hotel rooms are cramped, and if you got kids, you know, what are they going to do? And of course, you know, just go to the pool, go to the game room, you know, whatever. But you're not on deputation forever. It's a short-term thing, and so, you know, you look at it as making some sacrifices, you know. But again, whatever you think, I know of some missionaries that having like an RV or a travel trailer has worked out really good for them. And I know of some that it was a terrible headache. When they look back on it, they said, man, I just wish we'd not done that. Or I know several missionaries that did it, and about halfway through their deputation, they sold it and said it's not worth it. You know, so to me, it's only if you're just fully convinced that that's really what's best for your family, you know, then by all means do what's best for your family. But, you know, financially and other ways, it's really not the way to go. So when you figure that out, how you're going to do home base, if you're going to be moving around because you're in your travel trailer RV, or if you're just going to say, we're not going to have a home. We're just going to move around wherever we go. We're in a motel or whatever, that's on. Now another way to do it, though, is to decide, no, we're going to be in this location, we're going to work from this location. Every weekend, and if we do Wednesday nights, we're just going to spray out from this location. That's not a bad approach either, but you're probably going to want to put yourself where the churches are at. You know, if you do that in Indiana, you're not, you know, about 3 months deputation, you've exhausted where you can travel, even if you say, I'll go as far as 8 hours away. You know, it won't take very long. That there's not enough churches in 8 hours, you know, and keep in mind that not every church you call is going to have you. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but you know, not every church is going to say, yeah, come on. So if you were going to just locate yourself, which is what we did in our deputation for Kenya, you know, we moved, we made our decision based on 2 things. How could we get in a location where the most churches were at that we could just drive out on a Wednesday, drive out on a Sunday morning or a Saturday evening if we had to stay in a motel maybe for one night, and drive back home Sunday night. And then we just had home, you know. And so we made it based on, okay, we got to get where the most churches are and what's best for our one remaining child that was still at home with us. That's how we made the decision. So we ended up in Bentonville, Arkansas. If we made it based only on the first decision, we would have went somewhere around Little Rock. But because of Caleb's needs, we had a little bit of an adjustment and ended up, but within a 3-hour radius, there were over 300 churches within a 3-hour radius from where we were at. If we moved into Little Rock, there would have been over 600 churches within a 3-hour radius. So if you're going to do the home base thing, that is, yes, we have a place and we just go out from here, you're probably going to need to move to where most of the churches are. And that's not a bad thing to do. And that doesn't mean that you won't go out of that area. You know, now when we did that, that's exactly what I did. I said, okay, here's Bentonville, here's 60 miles, here's 120 miles, here's 180 miles. And I just started calling churches within these circles and telling them who I was and asking them, you know, would they like to have me come share the work. And so we did a lot of work within those 3 circles. But sometimes you're at an association meeting and a guy that lives way down here says, hey man, I'm very interested in what you're doing. I'd love to have you come present that to my church. Could you come? Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, unless you just can't, you know, unless there's just not enough time left or whatever, yeah, make it happen and get yourself 2 or 3 appointments down there and, you know, let that be that. So different ways of doing it. And again, that decision for me was, this is what's best for our family. And the reason I felt that way is because for our son, we did want to have as stable of an environment as possible. But also, what do you do on Monday and Tuesday, Thursday and Friday and Saturday? What do you do? You know, if you're just out, you know, well, we're just sitting here in the motel twiddling our thumbs, you know, or we went to see the giant acorn and the biggest rocking chair in the world, and, you know, whatever great sights, you know, this area has for us to enjoy. You know, it kind of, sometimes feels like just wasted time. You know, you're just sitting there biding time until the next church service. Whereas if you've got this location, this is our home, and you've got something to do, and you also maybe make some connections locally that you can, you know, kind of do some things there. Now, another thing that I don't see missionaries do very often, and maybe it's because it would be too much if they did it. Although I have to say Eddie Williams actually does this quite a bit. When he's home, he does a lot of revivals and stuff. So, you know, if you said to the churches, hey, we're back home because we're on furlough or we're on deputation getting ready to go, but we'd love to do some, you know, revivals or special mission conferences or whatever, if anybody'd like to have us for that, then maybe you catch some extra services, which would, you know, just, for me, would just make me feel like I was accomplishing something. You know, just sitting there all the time, sometimes it feels like you're not accomplishing much. But we will talk about some things that you can do during that downtime to continue to be able to make some ground and accomplish some things. Okay, so we figured this out. Either we're going to be traveling around or we're going to have a set location or whatever. We got that figured out. Okay, that kind of dictates how we're going to set up map things out of where we're going to be and how long we're going to be there, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So we start making our calls. Maybe our pastor makes some of these calls for us, or maybe we're making them, and somebody in the local area is kind of helping us out, you know, with making the calls, however we determine to do that. Of course, if you're not making the calls, then I guess it's up to the person making the calls what they say. But basically, what I would do is I would call the pastors. Now, in this situation right here, I made absolutely no preference of one church over another. I decided to work within those three circles, unless I was invited somewhere else, or, you know, God just something specific, hey, go, you know, ask this pastor or whatever. But pretty much I worked within those three circles, and all I did is I went through my ABA book, and I had my map out, and I, you know, had zone 1, 2, and 3, and I marked in the book which one they were in, and in alphabetical order. I just started going through there and calling them. And, you know, tried to use a little bit of, you know, reason. I mean, if one was way over here and the other one was way on the other side, you know, that didn't make for it was possible, but, you know, why not choose two that are, you know, fairly close together, so you're not having a big afternoon of travel on Sunday afternoon. But I just started going through the book and started just calling them, just alphabetically. And I would say, you know, hello, my name is Scott Borland, and I'm a missionary going to Kenya, Africa. And I just wanted to call and see if your church would allow me to come sometime and share my burden and the work that God's called me to do in Kenya. Then the pastor will respond. If he's a mission-minded pastor, he'll say, oh, absolutely. You know, when are you going to be in our area? Let's see if we can work out a time. And then you start, you know, working out whenever would be the best date. I tried to schedule at least 2 months in advance. It didn't always work that way. Sometimes it was a little bit shorter notice. But I wanted them to have time to prepare their people for me coming. And so I tried to schedule it out at least 2 months in advance and keep my calendar full, you know, for the next 2 months. But the pastor doesn't always respond that way. Sometimes he says, well, I don't know. Our calendar's pretty full. We're pretty busy, blah, 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 blah. Which might be exactly the truth. Or that might be code for, we're really not too friendly to missionaries around here. And, I'm not sure if I really want to have you come or not. Now, the way I figured it was, that was God telling me where to go and where not to go. And so I just said, oh, well, I understand, no problem at all. If you ever would like for us to come, please feel free to give me a call. Now, if that dude ever thought he was going to give me a call, he would say, okay, what's your phone number? Yeah. But if he didn't say, okay, what's your phone number, then, I never expected to hear from him anyway. So I just, would thank him and end the conversation and let that be that. But sometimes I'd have those kind of conversations, then later on I'd see them at an association meeting or something, and they would set up an appointment with me. So, you just never know. Several pastors said to me, they'd say, Brother Scott, our church is just a really small church. And, I would love to have you come, but I just hate for you to come speak to us and then miss an appointment, over somewhere else where you could have a better opportunity maybe. And again, maybe that was sincerely the way he felt, or maybe it was a smokescreen. So what I would do is I would test it out. I would say, well, Pastor, listen, it's completely up to you. It doesn't bother me at all that your church is a small church. If I can come and talk to your people and feel in my heart that they'll pray for me, I'd be happy to come. I wouldn't bother me a bit, no matter what size your church is. But, I'll leave that up to you. Okay? Now, if it was a smokescreen, he'll insist. No, I just don't think it's right. We probably shouldn't. Oh, well, thank you very much. I understand completely. And that's it. But if it wasn't a smokescreen, if he was sincere, he just didn't want to keep me from going to the big church, he'll say, well, now, Brother Scott, honestly, I'd love to have you. So, if you feel that way, that's great. Let's go ahead and set up an appointment. I tell you something. Lots of those little churches got on board with us. Or we go to a big church, we might get a big offering when we win. They might give us, $4, $5, $6, maybe even $1,000, that's kind of nice, to have a nice one-time offering. Those little churches would support us for $50 or $100 forever, just get on board with us. And here's what I think made for that dynamic. Number one, they hardly ever have a missionary come visit them. Mm-hmm. So when a missionary does come, it's like very special, and so there's an instant connection. And number two, because the group is smaller, it can be a little bit more intimate. It can be a little bit more get to know you kind of thing, because they don't have missionaries come very often. They're, a lot of times, I don't say if more interested is the right way to say it, but they're more interested maybe, and because of the small setting, they can talk to you a little bit more afterwards and everything, and you make a very real connection. And this church, that'll send you $100 a month until Jesus comes back or you leave the field because they made a connection with you. Well, man, that's a valuable thing. I'll take that any day over going to the 700-member church, that give me the one offering. And that's not saying anything negative about the big church, but often they've already got their mission budget set, and they've got all this kind of stuff, and it's just the nature of bigger churches. It's like jumping through 1,000 flaming hoops, to get something done. And so even if they did fall in love with you, it's going to be 6 months from now before they can go through all the things they got to go through, to make a decision to, put you on for mission support, So I always tried to assure that pastor, that small church. In fact, the very first Sunday that we went out, I can't even remember where we went Sunday morning, but that Sunday night, we went to a church. I spoke to 6 people that Sunday night. That's not the smallest ever. I spoke to 3 people one night. But what does that matter? They're a church of the Lord Jesus Christ. And honestly, I wasn't blowing smoke. If those 3 people will pray for us, that's awesome. That's what I need. That's what I'm looking for, you know. And if God leads them to support us financially, praise the Lord for that too. So I would encourage to not think that way. Not think, I got to get to the big church. I got to get to the church that I know does a lot of missions. Like Anderson, for example, they do a lot of missions, you know. And it might be that we would think, man, I definitely want to get to Anderson, you know, to talk to them. And one thing as a local pastor I know is Anderson would be willing to have people. They're that kind of church, they'd definitely be willing to have people. But, you know, if I was actually to say to a missionary, if you went to this church versus this church, which one would be more likely to take you on for monthly support? It might not be the church that's already doing lots for missions, because their plate may be, you know, kind of full, you know. And if they're going to decide to take on a new missionary, it might be a decision of who do we stop supporting so we can support this new missionary. And, you know, so it might not be that easy. Whereas the church that, you know, doesn't have a lot going on, you get the chance to go in and be the catalyst of charging them and energizing them and getting them excited about missions. There's a church in Arkansas, and I noticed on James's report that they still do it. I went to that church, and it's not a real little church. It's probably a church of about 75. But they support the work in Kenya between $600 and $800 a month. And I don't have any idea if they're just putting all their apples in one barrel, or if, you know, they do other missions, you know, besides that. But I mean, they're heavily invested in Kenyan missions. And so you just don't know. So don't quantify or qualify or, you know, set up these rules about, oh, this is definitely the best place to go. I'd rather be here than there. You know, just let God take care of it. Always remember that. God is the one that's supplying your support. It's not even these churches that are doing it. God's doing it. He's using them to do it. But He's the one supplying your needs. So you don't have to worry about, oh man, if I can only get here, and if I can only get there, if I could only do that. I know of a church out on the East Coast that gives over $3 million a year to missions. Over $3 million a year. And they are doing lots of incredible things for mission. And I got the joy of being invited to their missions conference. And they took us along for support. And their regular support is for whatever missionaries they take on is $500 a month. That's just, you know, if you go and they decide to support you, $500 a month. And then they've got their own missionaries that they sponsor and send out, and that they rarely ask for any outside help because they've got the financial capability to do it. You know, so they report and let people know about the work of their missionaries, but they hardly ever say, you know, would you help us with this? If somebody feels led to send some money, great, but you know, they've got the money. So, you know, so in your brain you might think, oh man, yeah, I definitely got to get to that church. Well, if God works it out, if that's His will. But you know, or what happens when you've already got the appointment with the little bitty church where the pastor apologized and, you know, everything else, and you said, no, brother, you know, I mean, let's go ahead and do it. And then the big church calls, and you got the chance to go, but it has to be that date because that's the only date they have available. Well, if you're a man of integrity, you say, I'm sorry, I've already got an appointment, you know, scheduled. If there's some time we can do it in the future, I'd love to do it, but I've already got an appointment scheduled.
If it was far out in advance, would you call that and try to reschedule? If it was still out in that long.
That might not be a bad thing to do if you had plenty of advance notice and you could call the other church and say, hey, I've got this opportunity and I just wondered if we could reschedule. And a lot of times they would be willing, you know, to do that. But, you know, just to make sure that you're, you know, inside it's right. You know, you're not doing it just because of that tendency of, oh, this is a much better opportunity, you know. And sometimes you will have to reschedule. Sometimes churches will call you and say, I'm sorry, but, you know, we had this appointment, but this and that's happened, and we're not going to be able to keep it. You know, so that will happen at times. you'll have those changes. So, just let the Lord lead and guide and direct you in that and show you what you need to do. But just, again, don't be afraid that this church is better than that church. Just regardless of size, regardless of what you've heard, good or bad, just go. Almost all churches, of course, are going to give you an offering when you come. But, again, that's not really the point. And I went to 2 churches that didn't give me an offering. Well, okay. So that's where you figure out, do I really mean what I say or not? When you're calling saying, we just love to come share our burden and see if your people, could pray for us, and well, if you walk away and there's no check, did you really mean that? Or do you think, well, those dirty dogs, they didn't give me nothing, man. It cost me $50 to come over here. What's wrong with you? Well, if that's what matters, then you need to ask every time you make an appointment. Now are you guys going to take up a love offering for me? So of course you're not going to do that. Of course you're not going to do that. So now let's talk a little bit about follow-up, though. So let's say that you call and you get these appointments. You don't want that conversation that you have with that pastor where he agrees and you set up a date. You don't want that to be the last conversation you have before the day you show up. Okay? The first thing what I would always do is I wouldn't even, like people would say, start trying to give you details. Like, okay, well, our services start at such and such time, and here's the directions and stuff like that. And that's fine. If he's, just giving you that without you asking, that's fine. But if they didn't do that, what I would do is I would say, well, brother, I really appreciate it so much. And I tell you what, when we get a little bit closer to time, I'll call you back just to make sure everything still looks good and so we can wrap up any, details, last minute details. And I wanted him to know that I was going to be calling him back. And so as soon as I got off the phone with him, what I would do is I would put something in the mail to him. Had a little letter that I made up, thank you so much, Pastor, for speaking to me on the phone, looking forward to our date, and put the date in there. Here are a few prayer cards if you'd like to share them with any of the leaders in your church, because a lot of churches have a mission committee or something like that. So I put in 5 or 6 prayer cards, and pastor could use it however he wanted. We had a brochure made up, and I'd send that brochure. Now, hopefully, he takes that material and he uses it. It might just sit on his desk, or he might open it and say, "Oh, okay, throw it in the trash." That might be it. Who knows? But I sent it to him because I'm hoping that he would use it, and then I would call. I usually say about a week in advance, but it was usually a little bit more than a week. It was usually like 10 days in advance. And, just, hey, Pastor, this is Brother Borland. I just wanted to check and make sure everything looked good for our date next Sunday. And, sometimes he'd say, "Oh, man, I'm so glad you called. Man, I forgot all about that." That's not what you want to hear, but at least you're not hearing it when you show up at the front door, and him being like, "Oh, is today the day we said you was going to be here?" Man, because sometimes pastors just don't do a very good job. They agree to have you, but they don't do a very good job letting people know that you're coming and asking their people to get ready, for you to be there. So call a week in advance, and then that's probably when you get all the details, So what time are services, and also ask the pastor what he'd like you to do. Tell him, Now I have a presentation, and we'll talk about that here in a little while. I've got a presentation, it lasts X amount of minutes, and I can preach if you want me to. You know, a lot of times that's what I do, but I just wanted to, whatever you'd like me to do, Pastor, that's what I want to do. And if he says, the vast majority of the time, he's going to say, oh yes, the services are yours. You just come and present your work and preach for us. We're looking forward to it. The vast majority of the time, that's what he's going to say. But he might say, you know, being that you're going to be with us on a Sunday morning, I really feel like I need to preach. So what I'd like you to do is just take a few minutes and share your work with us at the first of the service, or I'll call on you at the end of the service or whatever. That's fine, Pastor. That'd be wonderful. Is it okay if I set up my display table? You know, just those kind of things. You just want to do whatever he wants you to do, and let that be that. And always remember that even if he tells you, you have all the time you need, even if he says it in front of his people, we're in no hurry, brother. You come and take all the time you need. Don't you dare do it. There is an unwritten stopping time, and you know when it is. It's an hour from whenever you started. That is the unwritten stopping time. Church started at 6, it's over at 7. And so in your brain, you say, church is over at 7, period. And I will be done by 7 o'clock. And so if they sing forever and just leave me 20 minutes, in 20 minutes, I will present my work and bring a brief devotional thought, and we'll be done. And the people will love you. Instead of still being there at 20 minutes after 7 and feeling like, I wish this guy would shut up. And, you know, hey, we ought to be more spiritual than that? Yes, we absolutely should be more spiritual than that. But we're not. You know, that's just the truth. The people here in America are not more spiritual than that. So you just determine in your mind that you're going to do it. No matter what the time constraint is, you're going to do it. And you can do it. You absolutely can do it. If you know that your presentation, if it's a DVD that it lasts for a certain amount of time, then you know that. So you know, okay, if I show my DVD, now I've got this much time left. Then you work within that time. Or if I show my DVD, that's all I'm going to be able to do. All right, then that's all I'm able to do. I don't even have time to show my DVD, so I'm just going to get up and speak briefly and let that be that. And whatever messages you use, you can condense them. You don't have to say everything. I mean, you preach it one week and it's a half hour. You preach it the next week and it's 5 minutes. Just hit the main points.
Is it okay to preach the same message over and over?
I did, yeah. I preached it over and over again, and I tell you why. Number one, just because if you're studying for messages, I would encourage you never get out of the habit of studying for messages. I kept developing new messages, but you're there for a special purpose. And, every message that you feel led to develop doesn't necessarily apply to where you're at. You have no idea if it applies or not. But what does apply is mission thoughts. That applies. So I had my messages that were basically framed around that. I did try for a little while to change it up and do some different messages. And my thought was, because of Missy, here she is and she's going and hearing me preach the same message over and over and over again, and she's not getting fed and everything, because I'm the only preacher she's hearing, and she's hearing the same thing over and over again. But I did that for a while, and it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't as effective. When I preached the message about having a burden, when I preached the message about why we should be excited about missions and how we can respond to that excitement, those messages put people on the edge of their seat because it was appropriate. It was for the moment. So you don't have to, but I don't think there's any problem at all, because it's new everywhere you go. It's not new to you. It's not new to your wife. It's not new to your kids, but it's new to those people. And I just came to the point of feeling like this is the appropriate message. This is what I need to tell people when I come and present our work.
Was that same But if you talk about, your family not getting fed because it's the same thing, would you have, separate like study time for the family? Maybe do something a lot different than that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. And we definitely did have, that time. And again, talking about how you have this downtime, and so you could have something like that. If you're doing the home base thing, you don't want, I don't think, now there are some men I love very much that disagree with me, but I don't think that you just want to kind of go out on deputation by yourself and not take your family. I think your family is an important part of that. I think the churches want to see them. But you might, if you're doing the home base thing, you might be able to hook up with one of the local churches on Wednesday night. And by the way, Wednesday night appointments are about the hardest appointment to get. It used to be Sunday morning. Sunday morning appointment was almost a no-go because pastors just wouldn't give up any of their time in the pulpit. Still have some of that. But Wednesday's hard because that's when everybody's having their children's programs. They've got a Warner or Discovery or whatever going on, and they not only they have all their kids wrapped up in it, but they got almost all their adults wrapped up in it too. And there's like 10 people in the auditorium, although there's 100 people here tonight. And so pastors will, again, that same thing. Well, man, I'd love to have you, but and I always did the same thing. I told the pastor, hey, it's up to you. If you don't feel like it's a good thing, it's fine. But I don't mind coming and speaking to 10 people. I'd love to do that. But it became a hard appointment to get. So it might be that on Wednesday nights, you might have your family get connected with one of the local churches, and that way your wife could go and be involved in a Bible study, and the kid, if they had children's programs, maybe they were there, and you might have some Wednesday nights off that you could be involved. But if you just took Wednesdays and that was kind of the time you went out by yourself, and then the wife and kids went over there on Wednesday night, that might not be too bad, but some way of supplementing it, because hopefully you're not going to be on deputation for a long time, but it's almost for sure somewhere between 6 months and a year. You're going to be on deputation, and so you hate for them to feel like they're not getting fed, all that time. So whatever you can do to help that situation out would be really, really good. Let's talk a little bit about our presentation. I would say, first of all, to remember that you only have one chance to make a first impression. And you can recover from a bad first impression, but it's not easy to recover from a bad first impression. So you want to be very, very careful. And I guess, maybe before we talk any details about presentation, let's just talk about some materials that we're going to need. First of all, you're going to need prayer cards. I really think that you should have them professionally printed. I don't think you should do it on your own unless you're blessed to just have some good equipment. If you've got access to some good equipment that'll put out something that's similar quality to something that's professionally done, great. But if it's going to be obvious that you did it in-house, I don't think that's a good thing. I think, that the Lord deserves better than that, and that it does have something to do with people's impression of you, And so I would encourage you to have your prayer cards professionally done. I would say also on your prayer cards to be careful about too much detail. You don't want to have this card loaded down with, all this kind of stuff. You do need something that gives some extra detail. That's why you need a brochure. probably like a trifold, brochure that's made on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And that's actually quite a bit of information, if you got that thing folded up and it's printed on both sides, that's actually a lot of information. And in your brochure, you can put a lot of detail in there. You can talk about your vision. You can talk about even your methods, how you plan on doing it. You can give statistics about the area and the people that you're going to, and all that kind of stuff. But on your prayer card, you don't want all that detail on your prayer card. Basically, what you want on your prayer card is a nice picture.
Catches their attention.
You want basic info on the area. Some people put their birthdays.
Send us money for a bread.
But I never did that because to me, it says exactly what it's like. Like you're expecting them to do something for your birthday. And if a church feels a strong enough connection to you that they want to do something for your birthday or your children's birthdays, they'll find out when your birthdays are. So I never really was real big on that. So to me, some people do them two-sided, and that's fine, no problem if you want to do two-sided. Well, even one-sided is fine. And, how big? Well, I've seen them, like that big. Pretty big prayer card. You got to think about what you're asking people to do with it. I would always get up and give our presentation. And then at the end of our presentation, the kind of last thing I would say is, here's our needs, or here's ways that you can help us. And I would hold up a prayer card and say, first and foremost, we need you to pray for us. We don't need anything worse than we need your prayers. Please pray for us. And back here on our table, there are prayer cards. I would never pass them out. I wouldn't just go and pass them out. They're just back there on the table. Because not everybody wants one. And they're going to just throw it in the trash. Why would you want the money you spent to have it professionally printed to just have it thrown in the trash? And so I would just hold it up and say, these are back here on our display table. There's plenty for everybody. Please grab one. Take this and stick it in your Bible or put it up on your refrigerator, or somewhere that you're going to see it. And every time you see it, just stop for just a few seconds and say, Lord, please be with the little ones. Bless them in their labor. Just that brief. You don't have to drop to your knees. You don't have to, pray for everything we need. Just a very brief prayer. And the cumulative effect of hundreds of people doing that for us, it will be dramatic, and so please grab one of these. And then I'd hold up the brochure. I'd say, now if you're the type of person that likes detail and you'd like extra information, maybe so you can pray in more detail, or just for your curiosity, there's also brochures back there. Please feel free to grab one of those. Again, there's plenty for everybody. We'd love for you to have one. Probably about 25% of the people would take a prayer card, and about 10% would take a brochure. And when we left, I left just a very few of those behind. I know lots of missionaries come through and they leave us a stack that thick of prayer cards. And I let them sit there for 2 weeks and then I throw them away. Because it does no good for them to sit there on our table or stuck in our, display, whatever we got forever. It doesn't do any good. So I, get rid of them. So I would leave 4 or 5. Just in case somebody was really interested, but they just couldn't be there. They even knew, so they're going to come back and say, hey, did they leave any prayer cards? Did they, that type of person, just for that type of person, I'd leave 4 or 5, but that's it. And so what I did was I didn't print nearly as many. I didn't print 10,000 prayer cards because I didn't need 10,000. I needed about 3,000 to do a year's worth of deputation. Because in my mind, if I was somewhere every single service, average congregation this size, this is about how many they'll take. I didn't need all those. And so I'm not going to spend the money on it. Not to say that everybody else is doing the wrong thing. That was just my way of thinking, you know. And I didn't want to waste any money that I didn't have to waste. And so you need prayer cards, you need a brochure, and another thing that you need is some type of visual presentation. So that could be a DVD video. That could be a PowerPoint. And that's about all it could be. Because if you're doing the old slides, that ain't gonna work. VHS tape ain't gonna work. Now, hold up cards, that ain't gonna work.
You should have your own screen projector, that type of stuff, right?
Carry your own equipment. Because although a lot more churches nowadays have that sort of thing, there's going to be several that don't. I would say that a couple of years ago when we were doing deputation, that maybe half had the equipment. That might even be generous, you know. But yes, take your own stuff. And again, depending on what kind of vehicle you're traveling in, that will dictate some of what you can do. We always, for the gas savings, because of the way we did our deputation, we just had our little car. So you couldn't carry a very big screen. I mean, the projector, the computer, and all that, you could basically get in one suitcase, no big deal. But you couldn't carry this big screen around because there wasn't room. So I had a little 3-foot screen, and I almost never used it. You probably think about 3 or 4 times that I used it. Usually there was always a wall, you know, just somehow. I mean, some churches had these big ornate fronts, you know, where you couldn't have shined it on a wall, but you know, usually there was at least a decent wall that was going to be bigger than that screen, and I'd just shine it on the wall. But in places that I had to, I'd set up that little screen and use it. But yeah, you want your own equipment so that you don't have to worry about that. Now, if you get there and they've got all the stuff and you don't want to drag out your stuff, fine. You know, different situations would call for different needs. But a lot of times, which is another interesting point, get there early. Tell the pastor you'll be there an hour ahead of time. Say, okay, service starts 6. Okay, I'll be there around 5, a little after 5. Would that be okay? If he says, well, let's make it 5:30. Okay, that'll be great then. I'll see you about 5:30. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to get in there, get everything set up, have a test run, and Missy would set up the display table and our banner and all that kind of stuff. That was her part. But every once in a while she'd need help because, you know, sometimes it was just obvious this is the best place to put it, but sometimes it was really difficult to figure out, you know, where should we put the thing. And so I wanted all that done before the first person ever walked in the building. You know, so I was then free to be standing there by our table or wherever the appropriate place was, greeting people and introducing myself as they came in. And I didn't want to have a surprise. I didn't want to, you know, just set everything up and believe it was going to work and then get up there and, oh man, you know, what's the problem? Well, you need that same type of lead time even if you're going to use their equipment. Because what if it's not compatible? What if you lose all your formatting on your PowerPoint presentation because they don't have the same version of PowerPoint that you do? You know, you need time to figure those things out, you know. Sometimes uncontrollable things happen and, you know, you are going to be running late. But the uncontrollable thing shouldn't be you. You know, if you just didn't get up in time or if you just didn't plan well, okay, that's your fault. You should have got it done. You know, a flat tire, you can't help. You know, you got to get out and fix the thing. But get there as early as possible. Have your own equipment. Now, there's 2 different veins of thought. One is like Brother James, for example, he loves the DVD. That's what he wants to do. And the reason he wants to do that is because of self-discipline, where he knows that DVD is 8 minutes long. It's 8 minutes long every time you play it. No matter what happens, it's 8 minutes long. And I think the last time he actually had 2 versions. Like he took one and made his full presentation, 8 or 9 minutes, but then he had one that he edited and cut down as like 4 minutes, so he had appropriate for different time frames depending on what the need was. But he liked that because he was afraid if he did this, he'd ramble. And he'd, spend 20 minutes just talking about the work. Because here's the key thing. No more than 10 minutes. Period. Point blank. 10 minutes. No exceptions. 10 minutes. My DVD, my PowerPoint presentation will be done in 10 minutes. Because you're going to lose people if you don't do it. They're not interested in your 20-minute presentation. We had a missionary come to our church about a year ago, and I love the guy. He's doing a great work. But he spoke for 40 minutes about the work, then preached. And you're killing me, man. I mean, we don't need all that detail. We're interested in you. We want to know where you're at. We want to see some faces of some people. We want you to tell us that some people have been saved. We want to rejoice with you. But we don't care about all the details of how Granny got saved. We just want you to tell us. Praise the Lord. One of our 80-year-old women got saved. Great. Let us rejoice. But we don't care about all that detail. And people don't. They simply don't care. So, 10 minutes. And you might have a couple of comments to go along with it, especially if you use the DVD. Now here's another thing that you want to think about. This is very difficult to update. This is very easy to update. Okay? So you got to think about those two things. If someone wanted to, they could, if they're just like, if I do PowerPoint, I talk for 20 minutes, I just can't do it, Well, you can time it. You can make it to where the slides have time, and where you have to stay within that time frame. You can even overlay it with voice, it's a lot more work, but you can do that. I like the PowerPoint because even though I had the same pictures and everything, I could kind of custom it to wherever I was at, whatever the situation was. Sometimes the pastor would say, now, I don't want you to preach, but I want you to give us a good, thorough presentation. I want to know some details. Okay. Well, then I better give some details. That's what the pastor wants. I want to do what he wants me to do. But I like the PowerPoint because I could change it up. I could put fresh pictures in it. If there was a new development, it was easy to change. And I was able to do it. I was able to take our PowerPoint and do it in 10 minutes, and no problem. I didn't get lost or off track, And so that's just different for different people. But I assure you, I don't know if you have thought about it as you've watched, missionaries that have come and if they've played a DVD for you. But if that thing's longer than 10 minutes, it feels like an eternity. I mean, it really does. That's just our attention spans. That's just where we're at. And the details that are important to give can definitely be given in 10 minutes. And then, if the pastor says, yeah, I want you to present your work and I want you to preach for us, then go ahead and preach, after the presentation. But just keep in mind that, I'm not going to be the one that causes this service to last an hour and a half. If I've only got 10 minutes to preach, then I'll stay within that time frame, whatever it might be. I guess the one other thing that I would say is, what about questions? Some missionaries will say, after they do their visual presentation and make a couple of comments, does anyone have any questions? Okay, that's fine. If that's what you feel led to do, that's fine. But just be aware, if they do have questions, that your time is slipping away. And I do think you preaching for them is important. Even if it's brief, I think it's important. I think people will make some decision in their mind based upon your preaching. I think that will mean something to them. So just realize that any questions that are asked takes time. And I went to a small church in Oklahoma, and I didn't get to preach because they gave me plenty of time. I mean, they sang a couple of songs, and then I was up. And I did my 10 minutes and a couple of comments. Does anybody have any questions? 40 minutes of questions, which was good. I mean, they were good questions. They weren't dumb questions. It gave me a chance to talk about the work. So finally, at about 5 minutes till, I had to say, well, listen, man, I really appreciate your questions, but it's getting close to time for us to close out. And I shared the gospel and turned it over to the pastor. And so I changed, and I stopped asking for questions. I presented, I made my comments, I said, if you do have any questions, write that down or make a mental note of it. After church, we're not in a hurry. You feel free to come up and ask us any questions you have. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. And that worked a lot better. It kept from potentially losing a lot of time. And, your question's not everybody's question. So, maybe it helped in not wasting other people's time as well. But after I had a couple of times where the questions really went long, I felt like I'd be better off to just not open it up for questions because I want to be sure to have a chance to preach and present the word. Questions? All right, here is the study sheet for the quiz that will be coming up next week. I told the class before you guys that you guys have had me before, so you know this. It's not my intention to trick you or deceive you. I don't get any joy out of you getting a less than perfect grade. I want both of you to have 100%. So if you know everything that's on that study sheet, you'll know everything that's on the quiz, and you'll be able to get 100%. If you look at it and there's something that's just totally confusing to you, I don't remember us talking about that, you ask me, and I'll be happy to go over it with you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for our time together today. And as we think about church planting and we think about deputation, Lord, I really pray that the thoughts that have been shared will be beneficial. Lord, perhaps somewhere along the line, these men will be on deputation and they'll need this information. I pray that you'll give them clear remembrance of it. Or Lord, maybe they won't be in that situation, but they'll be a part of a church that'll have people coming on deputation, and hopefully this information will help them as these people come and share their burden for their mission work. Lord, we just pray that this time be useful in our lives, not just for this moment, but for years to come. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Why? The camera was still on you more.